The air is thick with acrid smoke and the briny scent of the York River. It is the night of October 16th, 1781. Inside a cave dug into the clay along the southern bank, a man sits in a silence broken only by the incessant thunder of the Franco-American artillery. It is Charles Cornwallis, the British Lion, now wounded and trapped. Above him, the town of Yorktown is crumbling under a rain of fire that knows no respite. A few hours earlier, nature itself seemed to have turned its back on the crown. A sudden, violent storm scattered the boats that were to ferry his troops to Gloucester Point, the last route of escape. Fate is sealed. The world Cornwallis knew, a world of imperial supremacy and British order, is about to be turned upside down. 2 days earlier, on the morning of October 17, silence had suddenly fallen over the battlefield. A British drummer had climbed onto the parapet, beating the parley, while a white flag waved against the Virginia sky. These were the first surrender negotiations. Now, on October 19th, it is the day of the ceremony. 2 columns of soldiers line up along the Hampton Road. On the right, the Americans, in worn uniforms but with the proud gaze of those who have seen the dawn of a nation. On the left, the French, immaculate in their white uniforms, a symbol of the Bourbon power that had tipped the fortunes of the war. As the redcoats marched out of their fortifications, their heads are bowed, their faces drawn with humiliation. Legend has it that their band played a popular tune, "The World Turned Upside Down." This is the moment when history stops being chronicled and becomes myth. The moment an empire bows before a handful of rebels. This is the epic narrative that has fueled American patriotism and modern cinema. The drama of a trapped general and the glorious birth of a republic. But what do the primary sources really say about these events? What were the actual terms of the capitulation, and how have historians interpreted them over the centuries? This is where the romantic narrative collides with documentary rigor. Let us begin our academic analysis. Analysis of primary sources. Chronological breakdown. George Washington, letter to Thomas McKean, October 16, 1781. In this official communication to the President of the Continental Congress, Washington describes with technical precision the assault on redoubts number 9 and 10. He emphasizes the exclusive use of bayonets to maintain the element of surprise, praising the steadfastness of the Marquis de Lafayette and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Hamilton. The text reveals a strategic vision focused on the need to command communications between York and Gloucester. St. George Tucker, Journal of the Siege of Yorktown, September through October, 1781. Tucker, an officer in the Virginia militia, offers a daily and detailed perspective on the entrenchment works. His journal documents the methodical progression of the siege, describing the effectiveness of French artillery fire and the growing state of demoralization within the British lines. His testimony is crucial for understanding the logistics of 18th century siege warfare. James Thacher, a military journal during the American Revolutionary War, 1775 through 1783. The surgeon, Thacher, provides the most vivid description of the surrender ceremony on October 19th. He notes the symbolic detail of Cornwallis's absence, who claimed sudden indisposition, and General O'Hara's attempt to hand over his sword to the Count de Rochambeau rather than to Washington. Thacher also documents the reaction of the British soldiers, who threw down their weapons violently onto the pile as a sign of contempt. Articles of Capitulation, October 19, 1871. The final document, signed by Washington, Rochambeau, de Grasse, and Cornwallis, represents the primary legal source. Composed of 14 articles, it establishes the fate of the York and Gloucester garrisons. Article 1 defines the soldiers as prisoners of war of the United States and the sailors as prisoners of the French Navy. Article 4 guarantees officers the retention of their private property and their sidearms, a detail that reflects the military code of honor of the era. Analysis of secondary sources. Scholarly debate. George Bancroft, History of the United States, 1834 to 1874. Bancroft, a representative of the Romantic or Whig school, interprets Yorktown as the inevitable culmination of providential progress toward liberty. His analysis focuses on the moral virtue of the colonists and the almost divine genius of Washington, often minimizing the French technical contribution in order to exalt the national character. Barbara Tuchman, The First Salute, 1988. In this work, Tuchman shifts the focus to the international dimension of the conflict. She analyzes Yorktown not only as a land battle, but as the result of a complex diplomatic and naval chessboard. She points out that without the temporary naval superiority achieved by de Grasse at the Battle of the Chesapeake, Washington's siege would have been doomed to failure. John D. Grainger, The Battle of Yorktown, 1781, a reassessment, 2005. Grainger offers a critical reassessment of British strategy. He argues that the defeat was not due solely to Cornwallis's tactical errors, but to a systemic breakdown in communication between Cornwallis and Commander-in-Chief Henry Clinton in New York. Modern scholarly debate focuses on the war of nerves between the two British generals as the determining factor in the capitulation. James Kirby Martin, No Way Out, 2012. Martin analyzes the psychological and social dimension of the combatants. He examines the role of loyalists and Hessian mercenary troops, highlighting how the defeat at Yorktown marked not only the end of the war, but the failure of the British Southern strategy, based on the illusion of massive popular support for the Crown in the Southern colonies. Synthesis and conclusion. What have we learned from this analysis? The Battle of Yorktown was not merely a military event, but a point of convergence between European diplomacy, naval strategy, and colonial resilience. The distinction between the myth of the world turned upside down and the reality documented in the Articles of Capitulation allows us to understand how history is constructed through notarized acts, personal diaries, and historiographical interpretations that evolve over time. Understanding Yorktown today means recognizing the fragility of empires and the power of international cooperation, a lesson that remains fundamental to our analysis of the present. Analytical structure, questions and answers. What was the real technical motivation behind Washington's choice to attack the British redoubts with bayonets only? According to Washington's letter to Thomas McKean of October 16, 1781, The decision was dictated by the need for speed and silence. Washington writes, "They advanced under the fire of the enemy without returning a shot, and effected the business with the bayonet only." This tactic prevented the British from reloading their muskets and ensured that the assault would be resolved within minutes, minimizing American and French casualties under the crossfire from the fortifications. How did the British command officially respond to the surrender demand, and what were the contested conditions? Cornwallis initially sought to obtain terms similar to those of the honors of war, which would have allowed his troops to march out with their flags unfurled. However, Washington insisted on the same harsh terms that had been imposed on General Lincoln at Charleston the year before. In the Articles of Capitulation, Article 3 specifies that the garrison had to march out with shouldered arms, colors cased, and drums beating a British or German march, denying them the honor of flying their colors as historical retaliation. How does James Thacher's diary refute or confirm the myth of the music played during the surrender? Thacher confirms in his diary that the British massing band played a British march, but does not explicitly cite the title, "The World Turned Upside Down." He instead focuses on the soldiers' behavior. Quote, "Many of the soldiers manifested a sullen temper, throwing their arms on the pile with violence, as if determined to render them useless." The reference to the specific tune appears more in later secondary sources, suggesting the detail may be a mythopoetic addition meant to underscore the historical significance of the event. Is the opening scene, with Cornwallis taking refuge in a cave dug into the clay, historically confirmed? Not entirely. The National Park Service, the agency that manages the site today, considers the story of the so-called Cornwallis's Cave to be a popular legend. It holds that the cavity was the result of stone quarrying rather than a wartime shelter, and that Cornwallis's actual headquarters during the siege was the Nelson House, whose thick brick walls offered far more substantial protection from the bombardment. Some popular sources, including James Kirby Martin's essay for the Gilder Lehrman Institute, nonetheless repeat the cave anecdote. So the opening scene you saw is best understood as artistic license, not a documented historical fact.